It was a cold, gray afternoon in downtown Boston. People hurried along the streets, clutching their coats against the biting November wind. Karoline Leavitt, a young woman in her 20s with a sharp mind and a warm heart, had just left a political fundraiser. She was tired, her heels clicking quickly against the pavement as she made her way to the parking garage. She almost missed him. Near the corner of an abandoned storefront, slumped behind a pile of trash, sat an old man. His hair was matted, his face weathered by years of hardship. His military jacket, though torn and dirty, still bore the faint outline of a U.S. Army patch. In his shaking hands, he clutched a bruised apple and a torn sandwich wrapped in newspaper, picking carefully through the rotten scraps for anything remotely edible. Karoline stopped in her tracks. People around her averted their eyes, pretending not to see him. Some crossed the street. No one wanted to get involved. For a moment, Karoline felt the same pull to just keep walking, to tell herself it wasn't her problem. But something inside her snapped. Maybe it was the way he mumbled under his breath, like he was apologizing to no one. Maybe it was the jacket that reminded her of her own grandfather, a proud veteran who had fought in Vietnam. Without hesitating, Karoline crossed the street. "Sir?" she said softly. The old man looked up, his blue eyes glassy with hunger and shame. "I'm Karoline," she said, crouching down so she could meet his eyes. "Are you all right?" The man shook his head slowly, too weak to speak. People nearby stopped and stared. Some pulled out their phones, expecting a scene. After all, it wasn't every day that a well-known public figure Karoline was gaining fame fast in political circles was seen kneeling in the gutter with a homeless man. What she did next shocked everyone. Karoline took off her expensive coat and wrapped it around the veteran's frail shoulders. Then she pulled out her phone not to call a ride, but to dial a contact she knew well. The director of the city's largest homeless shelter. "I'm bringing someone in," she said firmly. "Prepare a bed and call the VA hospital. He needs food, care, and a doctor immediately." Still, that wasn't all. Karoline turned to the growing crowd, her voice strong and full of fire. "This man served our country," she said, her voice carrying over the hum of the city. "He fought for our freedom, and now he's left to starve in the streets. This is not who we are, and I refuse to walk past it." People stood frozen. Some looked guilty. Others lowered their phones, realizing this wasn't the viral scandal they were hoping for. It was a mirror, showing them their own indifference. An Uber pulled up moments later, and Karoline personally helped the veteran into the back seat. She climbed in after him, not caring that she was getting mud and dirt on her expensive dress. As they drove off, dozens of people were left standing on the sidewalk, feeling a strange mixture of admiration and shame. The story didn't end there. News outlets picked up the moment almost immediately. Someone had filmed her speech and posted it online. Within hours, the video went viral. "Young political star steps in to save homeless veteran," the headline screamed. But Karoline didn't do it for the cameras. The veteran, whose name was Thomas Briggs, was taken to a hospital that night. Doctors found he was suffering from severe malnutrition, pneumonia, and early-stage dementia. Thanks to Karoline's intervention, he received the treatment he desperately needed. Karoline went further. She didn't just hand Thomas off to a shelter and move on. She worked with veterans organizations to find him permanent housing, medical support, and counseling. She visited him regularly, sometimes bringing homemade meals. She even fought publicly for legislation to improve services for homeless veterans, using Thomas's story as a rallying cry. Months later, at a ceremony honoring veterans, Thomas Briggs stood proudly next to Karoline. His face was cleaner now, his body stronger, though the years of struggle were still etched into his skin. When he spoke, his voice was trembling but determined. "I was invisible," he said, tears shining in his eyes. "No one saw me anymore. But Karoline did. She saw a soldier, not a burden. She gave me my life back." The room erupted in applause. And as Karoline stood there, listening to the cheers, she realized something. True leadership wasn't about giving speeches or raising money. It was about seeing the people everyone else tried to ignore and refusing to look away. Karoline didn't stop with just one life. Her actions that day sparked a movement across the city and eventually the country. Inspired by her compassion, dozens of shelters reported an uptick in volunteers. New community programs were launched to support homeless veterans, fueled by private donations and public grants. Karoline herself rose to national fame, but she stayed grounded. She repeatedly reminded people that it wasn't about Harriet, it was about them, the forgotten heroes who deserved better. When she was later elected to Congress, her first piece of legislation was the Briggs Act, named in honor of Thomas, ensuring more comprehensive care for homeless veterans nationwide. Thomas Briggs lived out his final years not on the cold streets, but in dignity and warmth, with Karoline visiting him every Christmas and Veterans Day. At his funeral, Karoline gave the eulogy. She stood before a sea of flags and weeping faces, her voice steady. We often say we honor our veterans, but honoring them is not just words, it's action. Thomas reminded us that a nation is judged not by how it treats its most powerful, but by how it treats its most vulnerable. She paused, her eyes misting, and because of him, because of that moment when our paths crossed, I was reminded what real leadership, real humanity, looks like. As taps echoed through the cemetery, Karoline silently vowed to never stop fighting for every Thomas still out there waiting to be seen. The story of a single act of kindness had transformed not only 2 lives, but had planted the seeds of change across a nation. And it all started with one young woman who refused to walk away.